So I was in Ireland a few years ago, and I ended up in Ireland because my mom called me and she said, "Okay, Kevin," she said, "I've heard that when you turn 80 years old, it's harder to travel." She said, "I'm 79, we're going to Ireland." So we did. We went to Ireland, and we had the most amazing time. And I've been telling people after this COVID's over, please don't, whatever you can do, don't put it off. Just go to Ireland with my mom. It's amazing. She is the best traveler. So we were there, and I was in a pub, and I was talking to this guy from Germany, and I told him I was a storyteller. And he's like, storyteller, there's such a thing? And I go, yeah. He goes, do you get paid for that? And I go, sometimes I do. He goes, do you just make them up? And I go, well, yeah, sometimes I do. And he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe there was a job called a storyteller. And I said, there is. I said, well, look, man, if you could tell a story, what would you tell? Oh, he says, I would never tell a story. I said, okay, look, if you could write something, if you could write anything, what would you write? Oh. He gets all dreamy looking and he goes, oh, a manual. Oh, to write something and have someone do it. So right then and there, I figured out people are either story people or they're manual people. And so these stories I'm going to tell you today are for the story people in the audience. The Greeks thought of stories like a loom, in that vertically ran the metaphor, horizontally ran the sequence, and where they came together, they wove their invisible threads for their cloaks of immortality. I like to think of stories like the four brothers. There's a story of these four brothers, and they all went out and got different educations. One brother went out and became an architect, famous for his bridges and his buildings. The second brother went out and became a medical doctor, famous in his field, saving lives, known throughout the land. The third brother went out and he got into the mystical sciences, spirituality and some of the wild mysticism from around the world. And the fourth brother went out and, he never really could find his calling. He went around from city to city to city, and he just kept traveling on the streets. Well, one day the four brothers get together and they decide, let's see who got the best education. So they went for a walk and they come across a dead lion. Let's use this dead lion to see who got the best education. And the first brother's off, and the architect, and he sets up the lion's bones just like they were. It's a skeleton of the lion. The next brother, the medical doctor, hops in and he puts on the organs, the muscles, and the skin. Now it looks just like a lion. Well, the third brother gets ready to breathe the breath of life into the lion when the fourth brother climbs up into a tree. Okay, so the third brother breathes into the lion, it comes to life, it eats the three brothers, and the fourth brother climbs out of the tree and says, now we're never going to know who got the best education. But I think a good story works like that fourth brother, that we use a little bit of everything, a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of street smarts, and that's when we come up with our stories. Stories are about resiliency. This is the thing I think in the last year a lot about is resiliency. It's a word we hear a lot. And I looked it up in the dictionary and it means maintaining one's shape. And how do we maintain our shape when it's been compromised? Well, we do it through our stories, through family, faith, community. They hold us together while we grow into our new selves. They also help us with how we belong. Okay, this is another favorite word of mine, belonging, because it's two words, being and longing. Being somewhere and longing to be somewhere else. It's a paradox. When we are our most happy is when we belong. And when we tell stories, that's when we belong. When we laugh together, we're family. People think humor is universal. No, humor is not universal. It's very specific. It is family, faith, community. When you laugh with somebody, you are family. So I was thinking about this COVID this last year and how stories have changed, how much I missed being with an audience. Because the last time I was with an audience was back in last summer, and I was outside. Everyone was COVIDly distanced, and after the show, I was sitting at a table across from a guy. I was just meeting him at this table, and he was saying, don't worry. He says, I think I'm going to get through this. I think we're all going to get through this. Don't worry. I said, I don't know. We're going to lose some folks. He says, I know. He says, I think I'll make it. I go, why are you so sure? And he says, because of how many things I've lived through. He goes, people around here call me the cat because of my 9 lives. And I'm like, okay, buddy, what? You tell me what your last time was. Now, I love hearing stories from people. This is what I got to tell you. The thing I missed most about being at Camp Bethel is the stories people tell me. Like one time a kid comes up and I knew I nailed it because the kid goes, you're almost as good as my grandpa. Oh man, when you hear that, oh man, you know it went well. So I'm with this guy and I says, okay, tell me one of your stories about how you almost, ended your life. And he goes, I'll tell you about the last one, but this one wasn't anything special. I go, okay. And he said, well, I was in my airplane. He's got experimental aircrafts. I'm like, all right, buddy, you're already begging for it. And he said, yeah. And he goes, I was flying, I was ready to land. And he said, my landing gear wouldn't come down. He said, I tried everything. I couldn't get my landing gear down. So I knew I was going to have to crash. I go, oh man. He said, so what I did was I took out my cell phone and I called my wife. I go, yeah, I understand that. And he goes, and I told her, honey, go to the safe, quick, get out the life insurance policy. He said, I never got the thing notarized and it's not any good. He goes, I'm going to have to crash land the plane, but I think I got enough gas. I can keep it up in the air for 2 hours. Get to the lawyer's house. So his wife took the life insurance policy to the lawyer. She got it notarized and then she called her husband back and he says, okay, great. And so he said, now I got to land this plane. And he came into the runway, no wheels, and he slid it on its belly and he skipped across the runway and he made it. He lived. And all of a sudden he said, you know, it was because of calling my wife that saved my life. I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, for one thing, I ran out of gas. He said, and that did 2 things. He said, now I'm lighter, so when I hit, I don't weigh as much. And he said, and besides, without gas, I'm not going to explode. There's nothing to blow up. I said, that's right. And he said, and I learned something else. And I said, what? And he goes, just do the next right thing and things will just turn out the way they do. So I've been living by that guy's advice during this COVID. I've been living by just do the next right thing. I was thinking about my dad because he always had experimental aircrafts. I remember I went to a small college in southern Minnesota and my dad would visit and he'd buzz the campus in a little airplane, meh. And then I knew he was coming. So the airport was a mile from school and I'd run to the airport and there my dad would be with the props still going around. And I'd hop up on the wing. I'd get in the plane and we'd pull the cowling over and then we'd fly down the Minnesota River Valley. Oh man, in the fall, those leaves changing, it was so beautiful. And one time, Dad and I are flying when we hit a fog bank. I mean, you couldn't see anything. And I look over at my dad, and like usual, he's shelling peanuts, drinking hot coffee, unfolding a map, and tapping an instrument. And he turns to me and goes, hey, Kev, do me a favor. Look out that window and see if you can spot the ground. So I'm looking out the window when I hear my dad say, hey, Kev, it might not be down. Okay, so my dad was a person of the sky, but he came from people of the earth. My grandparents were farmers. Oh man, I love visiting their farm. We had what was called unstructured time, which now they call boredom. But I was never, ever bored on that farm. I haven't been bored to this day. Okay, I've been to some plays where I wished I was somewhere else, and other plays where I would have fallen asleep if I hadn't been the one talking, but I still have never been bored. And I got my grandparents to thank. My grandpa, he was one of those German farmers, as wide as he was tall. We used to say if it wasn't for the direction of his buttons, we wouldn't have known if he was laying down or standing up. My grandpa always carried a pocket knife and a pair of pliers. He said, be good to your neighbors. And he would laugh. He loved to laugh. My grandma was kind of opposite. My grandma, there was always a bit of fear surrounding her. Like there was this rooster on the farm and it would always peck me. I go, Grandma, that rooster's pecking me. She'd say, just stay away from it. Well, one day that rooster pecked my sister and that night we ate chicken. Toughest chicken I ever ate. But from that rooster, I learned, be careful who you peck. So my grandma, there's a bit of fear around her, but whenever I was in trouble, whenever something happened, I would go to my grandma because I knew she would protect me. She was the one who would protect me from it. She loved me, and I knew that. She had those huge Teutonic arms that she would wrap me in. And she was the first one that told me stories. She would tell me the stories of Tandverktrollet. Now, they're from Norway, and a Tandverktrollet translates to toothache troll. And they would climb into your teeth, and they would dig little caves with picks and axes in your teeth, she said. And there's only one way to get the Tandverktrollet out. And I go, what's that, Grandma? She goes, you have to brush. Okay. There's also a troll that had a really long nose, and he would sneak into your room at night, she said, and put its nose in your belly button. That's what your belly button was for. It would put its nose in there and suck out your guts. And I go, Grandma, no. And she goes, but the one thing that troll can't stand is a clean room. He comes across the floor on your clothes you've left. And so she said, if you clean your room, you don't have to worry about that troll. I go, Grandma, why don't you just tell me to brush my teeth and clean my room? Jeez, the trolls that suck out your guts. But you know what? I never forgot that through my grandma's stories. When I was a kid, though, there were two kinds of fairy tales. Fairy tales I hated and fairy tales I hadn't heard yet, because it always ended up for guys with a disability. It always turned bad. And like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, man, they're like Snow White trades in 7 perfectly good little ones for one big one. Ugly Duckling, loved that story, till I thought it was a swan. Then they find out it's a duck. Oh, man. I liked it better when they thought he was a swan, this huge uber swan. Then they find out he's a duck? Gee, what does that do for me, a kid with a disability? Hope a ship of aliens lands and goes, no, you're one of us. Meanwhile, I'm stuck living with ducks. But Grandma would say, no, Kevin, a story can go any way you want it to go. That's why they're called folk tales, because they changed with the folks. And so this is one of the stories my grandma would tell me. And it's back during the times when pots and pans could talk, which indeed they still do. And there was a man that would go to the river every day and fill 2 pots with water and bring them home. Well, one day it was discovered a small crack in one of the pots. And as time went on, that crack widened until by the time the man got home, all the water had leaked out of the pot. So finally the pot turns to the man and says, please, sir, give me another pot. And the man turned to the pot and said, look down the trail. And the pot looked down the trail. And on the side of the trail with the pot that didn't have a crack, it was craggy, rocky, barren. And on the side of the path with the pot with the crack, wildflowers grew. The man said, every day you water those flowers. Every day you make my difficult journey beautiful. I think I'll keep you. And with that, my grandma would wrap her large Teutonic arms around me and say, I think I'll keep you. So in these days, with all this going on, I think of my grandpa and my grandma. I always carry a pocket knife, a pair of pliers, be good to my neighbors, and watch out who I peck.
This festival is an important fundraiser for Camp Bethel, especially this year. Our excellent sponsors stuck with us. Can you help too? Please donate using the buttons or links on this page. Thanks, friends.
We hope the festival will be back home in person next year and need your help in getting the camp ready to reopen as soon as possible for summer camps, guest groups, and special events like the festival. Please click on the link below and make your contribution toward the work, the fun, and the fellowship that find a home at Camp Bethel. Thanks for watching, and thank you for your gift.